In every photograph, there is a story. Some are remembered with clarity, others fade until the details blur like smoke. But sometimes, when we least expect it, one photograph finds its way back to us, and in doing so, it changes everything we thought we knew. This story begins on a quiet spring morning in Willow Creek, a town where time seemed to move more slowly, as though it had been carefully preserved in amber. Evelyn Moore was 72 years old. She had silver hair she tied back neatly each morning, hands softened by years of teaching, and eyes that carried both laughter and loss. A widow for nearly a decade, Evelyn filled her days with habits she trusted to keep loneliness away. Another morning, tea, toast, and maybe a crossword puzzle if I feel ambitious. She tried to say it with humor, but truth often hid in her words. On the mantel above her fireplace stood the smiling photograph of her late husband, Harold. Every morning she spoke to him, as though his voice might answer back from the frame. "Well, Harold, you won't believe it. Another catalog in the mail. Who even reads these things anymore? Not a single handwritten letter. I suppose the world forgot how to write them." Her voice trembled with just enough laughter to disguise the ache beneath it. Evelyn loved her daughter, Claire, who lived 2 states away, but phone calls weren't the same as sitting across the table, sharing coffee and conversation. "Well, speak of the devil." "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. How are you this morning?" "Oh, you know me. Still boring as ever. Tea, toast, and talking to your father's picture." "Mom, you always say that. You're not boring. You just don't give yourself enough credit. Credit or not, I'd trade 100 tea mornings for one day with you and the grandkids. We'll come visit soon, I promise. The kids have been asking about Grandma's garden." "Good. Tell them the roses are waiting." When the call ended, Evelyn sat quietly. The walls of her home seemed to close in on her a little more each year. With a sigh, she decided it was too fine a day to stay indoors. She slipped on her cardigan and set out for a walk. Her feet carried her past familiar streets, each lined with blooming dogwoods and lilac bushes. And as though fate had guided her steps, Evelyn found herself outside Henderson's Antiques. It had been years since she'd stepped inside. The shop smelled of cedar and dust, filled with memories of other people's lives, stacked neatly on shelves and tables. Just a little look around. Nothing wrong with browsing. She wandered slowly, touching porcelain figurines, faded books, clocks that hadn't ticked in decades. Then her eyes fell on a basket near the window. A small cardboard sign read, "Old photographs, 10 cents each." Evelyn bent down and picked one up. Her hands trembled as she brushed away the dust. No, it can't be. In her hand was a black and white photograph of a young couple by a lake. The girl's laughter had been captured mid-breath, her hair caught by summer wind. Beside her stood a tall boy, his arm draped around her shoulders, his eyes alive with joy. And that girl was Evelyn. "That's me. That's Jack Campbell." The name pulsed in her memory like a heartbeat she hadn't felt in 50 years. It was the summer of 1963 by Willow Lake. Evelyn was 20 years old, her heart as wide as the sky. That summer was filled with music spilling from transistor radios, moonlit dances by the dock, and a boy who stole her heart in an instant. "Jack, you're going to fall in if you keep balancing on that log. Then I'll just need you to pull me out. Promise you won't let me drown? Only if you ask nicely." They had been inseparable. The kind of young love that felt immortal, immune to time. But the world had other plans. Jack was called into the army. Evelyn stayed behind to finish school. At first, there were letters. Long, tender, filled with promises. But slowly, the letters grew fewer. Then, one day, they stopped. Evelyn moved on as life required. She met Harold. They built a family, a home, a life together. She buried Jack's memory deep, telling herself it was only a chapter. But now, staring at this photograph, it all came rushing back. Why here? Why now? She clutched the photograph to her chest and hurried to the counter. This picture? Where did it come from? A state box. Belonged to a Campbell family? The name rang like a bell inside her chest. Campbell. Could it be? She paid quickly, leaving the shop with her heart pounding. That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, staring at the photograph under the lamplight. She traced the edges, her tears falling freely. Jack, after all these years, why did you come back to me now? Her question would not be answered that night. But across town, another soul was stirring. A man whose life was about to intersect with hers in ways neither could have predicted. George Campbell was 75, a retired mechanic with hands still calloused from decades under the hood, and a heart that beat with both stubbornness and kindness. He spent his afternoons at the community center, playing chess with old friends. Checkmate again, Jim. Don't take it personally. I've been outsmarting engines my whole life. Or maybe you're just too sneaky for your own good. They laughed, but behind George's smile lay a familiar shadow. His wife, Margaret, had been gone 6 years now. The house they'd shared felt empty, the walls echoing with absence. Late at night, George would sometimes open a worn wooden box, inside of which were photographs and letters he could not bring himself to throw away. Among them, always near the top, was a picture of his younger brother, Jack. You were the dreamer, Jack, always chasing something just out of reach. George never knew all of Jack's secrets, but that was about to change. 2 lives connected by one photograph. 2 hearts carrying decades of loss and silence. And fate was about to bring them together. The following week, Evelyn carried the photograph in her purse everywhere she went, as though it might explain itself if she kept it close. She could not stop thinking about Jack, his smile, his laughter, and the unanswered questions that had lingered for half a century. She knew only one thing for certain. If that photo ended up in Henderson's Antiques, it must have come from someone connected to Jack. And there was only one family she remembered with that name: the Campbells. One Tuesday afternoon, Evelyn attended a local history lecture at the community center. She often went to pass the time, listening to talks about Willow Creek's mills, churches, and forgotten landmarks. That day, she sat near the back, quiet, clutching her purse. The speaker was an older man, tall but slightly stooped, with a voice that carried warmth and authority. What most folks don't realize is that the old mill wasn't just for grinding wheat. During the war years, it was also the meeting place for ration distributions, town gatherings, even dances. Willow Creek's history isn't just about buildings. It's about the people who filled them. Evelyn's attention sharpened. His name, announced by the host, was George Campbell. Campbell. Her heart pounded. She waited until the talk ended and the crowd dispersed, then approached him slowly. That was a wonderful lecture, Mr. Campbell. I never knew the mill held such memories for the town. Thank you, ma'am. History has a funny way of hiding in plain sight. All you have to do is listen for it. They exchanged polite words, but Evelyn couldn't keep herself from asking the question that weighed on her chest. Forgive me for asking, but did you happen to know someone named Jack Campbell? The smile faded from George's face. He studied her carefully, his eyes narrowing in quiet recognition of a name that still lived in his heart. Yes, Jack was my younger brother. Your brother? The photograph seemed to burn in her purse. She wanted to pull it out right then, but her hands shook. Instead, she whispered softly, I knew him once. A long time ago. Knew him? How? She hesitated, unsure how to sum up a summer of first love in a single breath. We spent one summer together, at Willow Lake. He was everything to me. George's eyes softened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he motioned toward a bench outside the center. Maybe you should sit down. On that bench, under the shade of a maple tree, Evelyn told her story. She spoke of evenings at the lake, of Jack's smile, of how the letters came and went until they stopped altogether. Her voice trembled, but George listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, she finally pulled the photograph from her purse and placed it in his hands. I remember this picture. Jack had dozens, but this one he carried everywhere. Then why did it end up in an antique shop? After he passed, I boxed up his things. Too many memories, too much pain. Over the years, some of it got mixed into estate boxes. I suppose this one slipped away. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears, but there was relief too. A relief that Jack hadn't forgotten her, that their summer had lived on in his heart. He wrote about you, you know. Said you were the brightest part of his life. He did? But war changes a man. He came home quiet, distant. He never talked much about what he saw, but he held on to that photograph like it was a lifeline. They sat in silence, two old souls bound by memory. Evelyn felt the ache of years, but also something unexpected, comfort. I always wondered what happened. I told myself it was just young love, that I needed to move on. But a piece of me always stayed by that lake. That sounds like Jack. He had a way of planting himself in people's hearts. They shared a small smile, and in that exchange, something shifted. The weight of grief lightened just enough to allow a new connection to form. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn and George saw more of each other. At first, it was chance, running into one another at the market, at church, at the park. Then, it became intentional. One afternoon, George stopped by Evelyn's house to fix her squeaky gate. You really didn't have to. A squeaky gate builds character, or it drives your neighbors crazy. Don't worry, it's just a little oil and patience, like most things in life. Another day, Evelyn invited George for tea. They sat in her kitchen, sharing biscuits and laughter. Do you remember the dances they used to hold at the town hall? I remember avoiding them. I couldn't dance then, and I can't dance now. Oh, I bet you could. With the right teacher. Not unless you want broken toes. They laughed until their sides ached, the kind of laughter neither had known in years. But it wasn't only laughter. In the quiet moments, they shared stories of loss. Evelyn spoke of Harold, the years of companionship, the ache of saying goodbye. George spoke of Margaret, her fierce humor, the silence her absence left behind. People think grief fades. It doesn't. It just changes shape. It becomes part of you, like an old scar. Sometimes you don't feel it, and then some days it aches like it just happened. Their honesty drew them closer. They began to feel less like two people clinging to the past, and more like two people learning to live again. One evening, Evelyn showed George the photograph again. She placed it on her mantel beside Harold's picture. For years I thought this story ended at the lake. But maybe it led me here. Jack would have liked that. Knowing you're still smiling. And for the first time in a long while, Evelyn believed she could smile without guilt. But life has a way of testing fragile beginnings. And just as Evelyn and George were finding comfort in each other's company, a discovery threatened to stir old wounds and unanswered questions. The days that followed were restless ones. Evelyn and George had uncovered so much about Jack. Yet in that discovery lay a wound still tender, a story left unfinished. The photograph, now framed beside Harold's picture, seemed to watch over Evelyn's home. Some evenings she would sit with George, both of them staring at it in silence. Not because they didn't have words, but because the photograph said so much on its own. Do you ever wonder, George, what if Jack had stayed? What if the letters hadn't stopped? I used to ask myself that every night. What if he'd come home different? What if the war hadn't taken so much from him? But asking doesn't change the years we've already lived. I suppose you're right. Still, sometimes I feel like I've been living two lives. One with Harold, full, happy, whole. And another, the one Jack and I might have had. That doesn't mean either life was less real. You loved Harold. You loved Jack. Hearts can carry more than one truth. Evelyn turned to look at him then, seeing not just Jack's brother, but a man who carried his own scars, his own unanswered what-ifs. And in that recognition, something fragile but strong began to take root. The town had a way of bringing its people together. Through church suppers, markets, and socials that felt almost unchanged from decades before. Evelyn hadn't attended one in years, but when George invited her, she found herself saying yes. Lily, Claire's teenage daughter, visiting with Evelyn's family, whispering, "Grandma, you look so pretty tonight. Are you nervous?" "A little. It's been a long time since I came to one of these. And it's been even longer since I danced. Care to make me look less foolish?" "Well, I suppose one dance won't hurt." The music shifted, a slow, lilting waltz. George and Evelyn stepped onto the floor, tentative at first. Their movements weren't perfect. His steps stumbled, her balance wavered. But laughter filled the gaps where grace was missing. I haven't danced like this since Harold. He used to lead with so much confidence. I felt like I could fly. Then let's not try to fly tonight. Let's just be here. 2 feet on the ground. And so, they danced. Not for Jack, not for Harold, but for themselves. For the lives they'd lived, for the ones they'd lost, and for the quiet courage it took to keep moving forward. You know, George, I thought that photograph would break me, but instead, it gave me something back. And what's that? Permission. To remember, to grieve, to love again? Funny. I feel the same. For years I thought Margaret was the last chapter. But maybe there's still more of the story left to write. They walked on in silence, their hands brushing once, then again. Until finally, Evelyn let hers rest in George's. No words were needed. The night air carried enough. Life began to settle into something new. Evelyn and George didn't rush it, didn't force it. They simply shared days, cups of tea, errands, conversations that stretched into evening. The photograph still hung on the mantel, but now it was less a reminder of sorrow and more a bridge that had carried them to this place. I haven't seen Mom smile like that in years. Grandma's happy because she has a new friend. Yes, a very good friend. Seasons would continue to turn. Memories of Harold and Margaret would always remain, as permanent as the roots of the roses in Evelyn's garden. Jack's photograph would never lose its place of honor. But alongside those memories, new ones were blooming. Proof that love is not a single season, but many. The photograph that changed everything had not only reopened old wounds, it had stitched together new beginnings. For Evelyn and George, it wasn't about rewriting the past, but rediscovering the present. Because love, in all its forms, does not fade with time. It lingers, it transforms, it waits patiently until we are ready to see it again. And sometimes, when the weight of years feels too heavy, love reminds us we can still dance.